back to another episode of the Dare to Love podcast. Today I am joined with my very, very special guest, my beautiful therapist, Lindsey Martin. Lindsey is a wife and a mom of 4. She's a licensed clinical social worker and has worked in the mental health field for over 13 years. Working with patients of all ages, she helps guide people through emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical trauma through traditional and EMDR therapy. So welcome to the podcast, Lindsey.
Thank you.
So happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
Yay! So we'll definitely talk about therapy quite a bit, and because it's been so beneficial for me, but also just it's who you are and all of the how we met as well. Mm-hmm. So I found Lindsey after my dad had passed away. There's this, like, I'm sure a lot of people experience this when they go through trauma or loss, but there's almost this sense of like, when's the next thing gonna happen, and this like anxiety of like, well, my sister died, my dad died, who's gonna die next, and I had this situation where I could not get a hold of my grandmother. She wasn't answering her phone or whatever. I think she was like napping, but my brain immediately was like, she's dead. Like, I just like couldn't help but think the worst, the absolute worst. So I looked up my symptoms and I seen that it said that it was PTSD related, and so I was telling my mom, like, I think we have PTSD and we probably need to go talk to somebody. And so in the research of trying to figure out what PTSD was and looking up therapy, I found you on your website, and I was like looking through all your different like things that you work with, and I was like, well, I have that and I have that and I have that. She specializes in this, I have that. So I was like, well, I'm gonna go sit with her. And then I just you're like my angel sent from heaven, and I tell literally every single person about you. I'm like, every conversation I have, I'm like, you should go see my therapist. Her name's Lindsey. She's amazing. I'm just constantly like telling people about how awesome I think you are. So I think it's fitting to have you on the show. This is also going to be the last episode of the season, so I think it's fitting to have you be the grand finale, because you've helped me so much with so much that I've gone through the last several years, and I'm just so happy to have you on the show. So.
Okay, well, we're starting strong because I'm probably going to cry now.
Well, that's why the box of tissues
I was like, I see the tissues. I'm ready. Well, first off, that was very kind and generous of you to say. And I appreciate you saying it, but also you're the one that shows up and does hard work. So I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm very, very glad to have a safe space with somebody that I trust to work through a lot of the trauma with. That makes such a world of difference when you have a safe space to go to and you have someone that you trust to talk to. It makes a huge, huge difference. So it makes doing the work a lot easier because you're in an environment that's safe. So, yeah.
Well, I usually just try to ask myself, like, what would I need or what would I want as someone who has had experiences like the ones that I work with people on. And usually if I'm like, yeah, this would probably make me feel good, like some chocolate or a candle or, anything like that, then I'm like, okay, we're going to do that today.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of brings me to my first question. Like, you're essentially a trauma therapist, so, you're very familiar with that within your patients, but also your own personal trauma that's kind of led you into the field. So what was it like for you growing up? What was it, what foundation was laid for you as a child that led you into the field that you're in today?
So I'll kind of just start off by saying a lot of folks enter into social work or counseling or therapy of this sort typically when they have a history of their own. Not always, but a lot of times folks will start kind of that journey either because they want to take something that was difficult and try to make sense of it, or maybe they just want to learn and understand more about what happens in people's lives. But for me, I definitely think that my history and having grown up with complex childhood trauma did guide me into social work, wanting to help other kids when I was young. That was always what I thought. And then into adulthood, just realizing that, it is a space where if I can take what I've been through and be able to channel that into understanding and kindness for others, like that's what I'd want to do. So, so it's really kind of my experiences that did guide me to this career in this field.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a huge theme for the season, this third season, is people taking what they've gone through and making something out of it. So I think that's partly what makes someone so admirable, is when they can look at the trauma in the face and say, you're not going to take my joy away, you're not going to ruin that for me, and turning it into something else. I think that's really beautiful and admirable. I do want to touch on like one particular topic that I think you can speak on to whatever comfortability you have, but it's spiritual abuse, because I think a lot of us, especially those of us that have been involved in church for quite a while, we experience spiritual abuse, or we can experience spiritual abuse pretty frequently and not realize it. So if you don't mind touching a little bit on what spiritual abuse is and what it looks like, and what it means as a Christian when you're experiencing that, how to overcome those things, how to rationalize those things that are happening to you.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a very good question. So I guess I'll just start with like my own belief system. And I usually just kind of start with like, I just love Jesus so much. And so like really that like love of Jesus really has been present for me since I was a little girl. And so I will say that spiritual abuse is very complex, because particularly if it is through the guise of Christianity, you are taught about Jesus. And so I was taught about Jesus, and I'm grateful for that, because I always, even as a little girl, just loved Jesus and loved what I learned about Jesus. There were a lot of other things that I learned that were confusing and maybe contradictory to Jesus. And so I did find that common theme for me held strong and held true as I grew up, was being able just to go back and look at the scriptures that were Jesus's words or about Jesus's life, and kind of let that be like my anchor. Yeah. Spiritual abuse is typically when somebody or an organization will take a belief system and use it to control or manipulate. And so that can look like a lot of different things. It also can, you can take somebody's faith and belief system to oppress them, or to create shame, so that people will either perform in a way that they're being asked to perform, or complete tasks or roles that they're asked to perform. And so kind of like the time that you can kind of judge, like, is this happening, would be if you feel like your faith and your trust in God is being used as a weapon to create fear. So like, for example, if your closeness to God is based on how someone else defines your closeness to God, if your value in the church is based on what another person says your value is. So for my experience, I was raised in what I'd like to call an evangelical setting, but it was a very obscure evangelical side of things. And so in that setting, my stepfather was the pastor of the church, and it really got to the point where he would just create rules, assignments, roles for people based on what he would want them to do, not based on Jesus. And so, and so I actually, if you're comfortable, I will share one particular event that really sums up my experience as a child with spiritual abuse, and it was actually what led me towards EMDR. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Is it a good time?
Yes.
Do you want to do any other questions before I do it?
I'd love to get into EMDR after that. So
okay, perfect. So for me, there was a lot of language around prophecy, spiritual gifts, and even as a young child, I was taught that people that you had to be blessed with the gifts of speaking in tongues, you had to be given the gift of prophecy or discernment. Those things were based on how pure of heart you were. And so that was also based on your works or your actions. And so lots of rules, regulations around those types of things. So probably when I was 7, 8-ish years old, I kind of have always had a little slant towards justice. I would say even as a young child, I really advocated for myself and for others. And so when I got old enough to really have a voice, that voice tended to contradict some of the things that I was being taught. Mm-hmm. And so one of the forms of control is to really silence that voice, particularly in children. And so one of my most favorite things to do as a child was to sing. And one of the things I've learned through education and neuroscience is that singing is actually a calming technique that stimulates the vagal nerve, and it's a gift from God, literally, that we can utilize not just to worship Him, but to find like spiritual closeness to God, to find that calmness. And so as a child, I just loved to sing, and I would sing all the time, and I just wanted to sing anywhere for anybody. And obviously I talk a lot too. So when my voice started to contradict the way that I was being taught, or I was questioning some of the things that I was being taught, I was told that I could no longer sing in the church as a child, that my sister could sing in the church, but I could not. And the reason that my sister could sing in the church, she's 3 years older than me, was because she had the anointing and I did not. And so that was a wound for me that, like, up until 2 years ago, or really a year ago, that really stuck with me. And even though, like, I understand now that, like, those are forms of, control and power and silencing my voice, the concept of the anointing was so deep in my mind and in what I was taught in childhood that I had a hard time really believing in who God had made me to be, and that, like, who I was supposed to be, and that, like, trusting that, like, actually we all have the anointing, like. Right. So anyways, I went to a retreat about a year and a half ago, and I'll just plug someone who I love, if that's okay. Yeah, absolutely. Her name is Tori Hope Peterson, and she has written 2 books now, working on her 3rd, around her experiences with her own childhood trauma, but then how God has really taken that and made her able to speak and share not just her past, but her present with others. And so one of the ways that she did that, though, to give back individually, was she hosted this retreat called the Beloved Initiative. And it was in San Diego, and she would offer women to come and share their story, pray, learn about how to do that in a very practical way, how she began writing, how she came into her field as a speaker and things like that. And so I went, and that was one of the things that I really went to focus on, was how do I navigate this concept, this feeling of, like, not having the anointing, and hearing that anytime I wanted to sing or even speak, right, about who Jesus is and, like, to love God. So fast forward, I got a lot done through that retreat as far as, like, naming the trauma, really truly naming it. And understanding, like, okay, this is a really deep wound that needs more attention. And I'm so grateful, because I don't think I would have gotten there if I hadn't gone on that retreat. that Tori had set up for us. And so when I came back, I said, okay, now's the time. Now's the time to do a little bit of more like personal work and dig a little deeper into some of these wounds that I'm dealing with. And so that's when I started looking into EMDR. And I had honestly avoided it for a very long time because I knew from a professional standpoint how intensive it is. And I wasn't ready to do that work yet. And I just didn't quite know where to start. So part of becoming an EMDR practitioner is doing your own EMDR therapy. So having someone do that with you. So I did, and that was one of the first things that I did when I was going through the training and having being a participant in EMDR.
Yeah.
And so when I did my EMDR myself, one of the things that I was trying to reprogram was that like I do not have the anointing, or like I am not anointed. Like that's the narrative. Anytime I would be in a church space or felt those kinds of things happening within that, it was like that's what I would hear, like I'm not anointed. And so I was like, okay, like that's not from the Lord, right? That was from my abuser, like that was from that religious trauma that I experienced. Like that's not Jesus. He doesn't say that to me. And so when you start EMDR, you kind of identify what is the narrative, what do you hear. And so that's what mine was. And you just kind of visualize what is the picture that comes to mind from your childhood when you think about that. And the picture for me was in the church space that we were using at the time, there was like a room behind where the like singers would be and the speaker would be. Mm-hmm. And this is probably before you were born, honestly. So this is a little old school, but it was like a now I can't even remember what it was.
Like a choir room?
No, because this was actually like meeting at a university at the time. So it was like a school room, but like a lecture hall. And we had these things called transparencies. Have you ever heard of that? She doesn't? You hasn't heard? It's so funny.
Well, maybe.
I don't. It's okay.
And then
you really shouldn't.
Put it down and it shines. Okay. I did have that in school.
I don't know if you did.
I did.
You're being nice to me.
I did. In like elementary.
Okay. Yeah. Or preschool. But anyways, so in that room, the transparencies would go on, and then it would show the words to the songs to people on the screen behind. So basically, my visual, when I started to bring up that idea of I am not anointed, or I don't have the anointing, was me sitting in this room by myself alone every Sunday, because my job was to put the transparencies up while everybody else was participating in worship. And so I know it's like, and here's something I want to say to you, because I know that this is like a terrible story. I used to could not tell this story. Mm-hmm. Like I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't share it. I would have like visceral reactions to this story. So this is where like, when I went through this process, I was like, EMDR has changed my life, because I couldn't even allow myself to access this memory without having such an intense reaction to it, because it was so deep. And when we experience something in childhood that is so deep, like spiritual trauma, physical trauma, sexual abuse, anything like that, it is literally wired into your brain. And so you do have to take time to do this type of work that accesses the amygdala where these memories are stored. Anyways, just letting you know.
No, I love how you explained it.
Yeah, so from there, it was like when you do MDR, you bring up the image of like the terrible day or the terrible thing, and then you just allow your brain using what's called bilateral stimulation. So for me, I like tapping, so I did like the cross tap. So basically bilateral stimulation just looks like where you're crossing the midline of the brain, so you would tap back and forth. And so when I was doing mine, I liked tapping, so that's how I did it. But basically, you bring up the memory, you bring up the negative thought, and you tap. And you really just allow yourself to sit with the memory and let your brain take you through the reprocessing. Yes. And so I couldn't tell you what happened even right now, like from the beginning to the end, but I can tell you what happened at the end. And that's the beautiful thing, is that as I walked through this trauma and like I walked through the memories, I didn't know what I actually wanted to reprogram. Does that make sense? Like I didn't know, like, because I didn't actually want to be like, I am anointed. Like, that word still didn't feel safe to me, even after doing like the whole thing. Like, I guess my phrase wasn't going to go from I'm not anointed to I am anointed. Like,
Right.
it needed to be something else. And so we get to the end and we start to realize, like, at one point I thought, oh, is it going to be like I'm not alone? Because I did see like myself in that little room, like, as a child, and I saw Jesus with me. Like, that's what I visualized. Not like a hallucination, but like when I was reprocessing, it was like I'm sitting back there, I'm doing these slides, like I'm feeling like I'm alone, but like I can feel like Jesus's presence with me, and like realizing like he never left me. Like, I was never alone during that time. And so when it was time to like actually install what I wanted to remember when I thought about this memory, I just felt like God was saying, like, you're free. Like, you're free from this now. Now I might cry, because being free is like such a beautiful thing when it comes to spiritual trauma, because a lot of people feel really trapped when that part of their life has been controlled, because it is so abstract. So like being able to say, oh, I'm free. Like, I'm free from this trauma. I'm free from this memory. Like, it's not going to trap me anymore. Like, that was it. So we go to install I am free, and you bring up the memory, but you allow your brain to take you somewhere as you install I am free. And I ended my EMDR like process with myself like spinning in the middle of like a garden, like in The Sound of Music. And that's like literally my favorite movie of all time. And so my brain was like, and I used to watch it all the time as a child, like all the time. And so it's The Sound of Music. And we'll get to like why that's like so significant, I think, for me. But like, that's how it ended. Like, I'm installing like I am free, and I'm like spinning in this like garden, like The Sound of Music, like Maria. And like that, now when I think about that time in my life, like I think about that instead.
Yeah.
And isn't that so powerful and amazing how God can like create our brains, like yes, like have these like connections with people, good or bad, but then like the ability to like reprocess them and like rewire them with like his goodness and his grace and his love. And so anyways,
yeah, I love that. EMDR has been huge for me as well, doing it with you, and I recommend everybody to do it. Like, if you have the ability to process it and go through it, I definitely recommend it, because it altered how I thought about myself within like a few hours. Like, I went into it and left thinking differently, or I left thinking differently than I went into it. And it was really incredible, and it sounds really intense because you do relive it is really intense, but you relive the moment that you don't want to relive. It's the part you want to forget all about, and the moment that you press down as far as possible. You have to bring it back up and relive it to give it a new narrative. But I totally understand exactly what you're saying, because when we did my first EMDR session, it is kind of like your dream. It is kind of like you're dreaming. Like, you kind of have like this visualization of what's happening and reworking it into something else. So my like EMDR was me being in my childhood bedroom with my childhood self, and playing dolls and being a kid with my childhood self, and taking all of those lies and things that had been told to me or that I believed over the years, and shielding that from my childhood self, because I would never tell a child the things that I was believing about myself. So as an adult, it was important for me to shield my child self from those harmful things that either people said about me or made me feel like whatever. So EMDR is a huge, beautiful experience for me. I think just changed the trajectory of where my life was going when I started doing EMDR. So it's huge, very, very huge. So I know we've talked a bunch, obviously, because you're my therapist, so we talk all the time. But, what is the thing that you were able to hold on to with going through the abuse that you went through as a child, kind of into your teen years and early 20s, but you were still able to hang on to this faith that you had in Jesus and this love that you had for Jesus? What do you think kind of kept you clinging to that goodness?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think about this actually probably quite often, because I don't want to live a day where I don't consider like Jesus's impact on me and like how that guides, or like how that structures how I interact with anybody that I'm with. And so for me, having been taught, which again, I can be grateful for the things I was taught about Jesus and what I had access to, because there was a lot of censorship in like what I was able to listen to or read growing up. And so, but the Bible wasn't censored. And so I really just was able to spend a lot of time in the Bible, and I was always back in reading about Jesus. And I was able to recognize that like what I was seeing, or what was happening to me was not Jesus. So like it was able, like I would just say, like being able to go back and read exactly what Jesus said, like be there and like look at his life, his experiences. And I was able to really know for myself, right, that what I was seeing, what I was being taught, what was being shown to me, like just was so contradictory to Jesus. And so that's really what helped me stay strong in my faith, was because I could see very clearly like these people aren't functioning in a way that reflects Jesus. So they can say that whatever they want about it, but it's not Jesus. Like I'm reading it. It's right here in front of me. And so I think having the ability to do that and just continue to return back to that, and then just say like, I want every interaction I have, I want every like decision I make when it comes to other people to look like this. And then also the fact that Jesus suffered. Like I think for me, like knowing that he did everything right and he still suffered, like meant that like even though I was suffering, it didn't mean I was bad or I was wrong. And that was really important to like continue to hold on to, that like if I'm going to follow Jesus, obviously I'm not going to be Jesus because Jesus is Jesus. Like I'm never going to be like him in that way. I can try my very best to just honor him by living my life that way. And so that's really, and honestly that stays true now, even as an adult. Like I think I keep it as simple as I can, just because there is a lot of doctrine that still sits in my brain from lots of things. I always just bring it back to Jesus.
Yeah, and that's been really helpful for me too, dealing with just all, like coming to you and dealing with all of the trauma that I hadn't dealt with yet, being able to know the characteristics of Jesus, and it takes time and energy to know that, right? Like you don't just you have to get to know him just like anybody else. So it takes, time and energy to be able to do that, but getting to know the characteristics of God, and then comparing them to what I'm being told, it gave me the ability to make those right decisions for myself, and not really feel shame or guilt for it, because I know that I'm listening and heeding the voice of God and focusing on what he's telling me to do. Not to say that he can't use other people to inspire you, but definitely, making sure that it's characteristically in line with who he is. I think that's a very important aspect of everything. So you've been in the mental health field for over 13 years. What kind of drew you in? Was it just you wanting to turn the negative into a positive, or was, there specifics, or what kind of drew you to the field of therapy and social work and working with people that have had major trauma?
Yeah, so I definitely think it was just my experience, like growing up and knowing like that there's a lot of hard things in the world. And so I was very much, even as a teenager, wanting to go into social work. I just felt really drawn to the idea of helping children, kind of in a more social services type of aspect. So I did get my degree in social work because that was really what I felt like I would be doing. I wanted to be a missionary or an evangelist even when I was a young child. So as I got older and was able to kind of shape what that would look like, I thought, I'd love to have a degree to learn some really practical skills and then serve others and just show who Jesus is by the way that I help people or the way that I serve. And I also wanted to travel. I was very much wanted to go and do things, see the world very much. So I thought, okay, I can do international social work. I can do it this way and still show who Jesus is in my choices and my actions. It wasn't until I had an experience my second year in college that I thought, I want to consider mental health and I want to work with individuals who are really potentially suffering with the impacts of trauma and how that can manifest as depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, things like that. And so I did have a very lovely, precious boyfriend in high school. I did graduate at 17, so I would have been 17 when we dated. He was 18, so I was a year ahead. He was a year behind. But we met at my mom's school. My mom at the time had a Christian private school, and so that's where we went to school together. And he was precious. We didn't end up dating in college when I moved off, but we did stay in touch some. And kind of a marking of my college experience was when I did receive a call that he had died by suicide. And that was a really, really difficult time in my life to, one, even experience the loss of someone close to me, but I think the loss of him being so young was really what was so hard. And the process of figuring out what did we not know as his friends, what did we not understand about what he was going through. And even though I was far away, I felt a lot of responsibility towards not being there for him in the way that I should have been and that I wanted to be. And so that type of loss and grief and mental health is really where I think God was shaping this particular pathway into therapy. And so over the years, I have worked internationally. I have worked specifically in foster care and adoption because there's obviously a lot of childhood trauma that shows up there and a lot of instances of mental health concerns. But then in my current role now, where I'm kind of really centered and focused on these complex wounds and grief and loss, which is also kind of, again, how we met and what drew us together, is where I feel like God was saying, I'm gonna guide you to where you need to be at different points in your life. And one way that I just wanted to honor, his life, his name was Chase, honor Chase's life, was by saying, I can show up for other people and make sure that everybody feels valued, every one person matters. And so this year will be 20 years since he died. And so I do think about that now and think about the young people that have been impacted by his life and by, I guess, what God taught me through that loss.
Yeah. So it was 2005 when he passed?
Yeah.
So in the 2 decades that you've kind of been witness to mental health. I'm sure the stigmas have changed a bunch. And people's perception have changed a lot as well. Do you think it's getting better, more accepted now, or the same?
I think that this will be anecdotal because I really haven't done like the numbers to get like the actual stats. I think that people are more understanding that depression, anxiety, all of these things are symptoms of something bigger. So trauma, loss, situational. So whereas I feel like even 20 years ago, it was considered pathological. Like if you were depressed, it was because something was wrong with you. And there really wasn't a lot of attention to like what's happening in your world. And so now I think there's a lot more focus on that. And so there can be less stigma. I still think for men, for boys, you know, for them, I do feel like there's still pretty significant stigma on talking about your needs. And so that is why like I do work with men who have had trauma or who have had those types of symptoms, because I do think they do need a place of safety and support as well. But it is very hard for them to seek therapy for sure. For Chase, and I even didn't make this realization until a few years ago, but his situation was unique as far as like what he was going through, because he lived with his grandmother. His father lived in the home, but my understanding was like he didn't really interact with his father. His father had alcohol problems. His family was very wealthy. So this is a very wealthy family. So from the outside, I think people didn't really understand that like trauma can exist in that space as well. Right. And the loss, and then his mother was not in the picture. His mother had left him. So here we have a young man who is essentially in kinship guardianship, right? Kinship foster care, which is where you live with someone who's related to you. And I really didn't connect all those dots as to like the work that I do specific with former foster youth and with adoptees until like really a few years ago. It's like, oh, this is why God has me in this space. Like that is like he was, you know, he was a child who had lost parents to addiction or to other things. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
No,
but
for sure. I also think it's just like a beautiful part of your testimony that it all kind of connected back to what started it for you, which I think is really, you know, poetic and just kind of how God works in our lives a lot of the time. I know for me growing up, you know, people don't just do things like to do them. Like there's always a reason behind why we make the decisions that we do. So growing up, it was never really taught very much. And then as an adult, I'm like, wait a minute, like there's things that need to be addressed here. And but as a Christian, a lot of the times the answer is to pray. If you're depressed, just don't be depressed. Like that's kind of like just pray and ask God to take it away. And it can make your faith, it can make you feel like maybe you don't have enough faith, or you're not a good enough Christian, or you haven't done enough good works because you're still feeling suicidal, anxious, depressed, whatever the scenario, the case is. As a Christian community, as the church body, brothers and sisters, how can we help to redefine what that looks like and give people a better understanding, a biblical understanding, to destigmatize some of the things that we've been taught our entire lives about like mental health and how to solve those problems?
Okay, I think I'm going to give you two answers, and then you can decide which one you want to use. Does that sound okay? I can speak from like a perspective that may be more received for different audiences. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So one way you could communicate this to the Christian community, church community, and I have utilized this method to help, again, create access. So this is why I'm going to I'm just giving you a disclaimer now. You can kind of pick what feels right for the podcast. One way that I've kind of been able to present this to folks within the Christian community is that if there's sin in the world, and if sin is a part of our lives, then sin is what opens the door to these types of, bad experiences. So internal or external. Mm-hmm. So that's trauma, external, right? Things happening to people because of sin, other people's sin, a sinful world, or internal, right? Where it's a reaction to sin in the world. So it's not sinful to have depression, but it's a result of sin. And so I can present it in that way so that people understand that actually treating mental health is addressing sin in your own life or in the lives of others or in your community. And so by treating mental health through therapy or through medication, we're saying we recognize that sin exists, that we want to do something about that, and we want to reconcile with God. And really our bodies, our brains, are made by God. And so if God made our brains and our bodies, he understands, what is the goals. The goals are peace and joy and love and patience and these beautiful mm-hmm. things that God has for us. But when sin enters in to our lives through trauma or through, again, sin of other people, how that impacts us, then essentially it's going to change our brain. It's going to change our bodies. And so if God made our bodies to function in this way, then he would want them to return to that state of how he would have originally created it. And so again, the neuroscience shows us that there can become chemical imbalances. You can have hormone imbalances because of what happens when our brain feels afraid. And sin brings fear. And so fear is the root of depression, anxiety, any type of psychosomatic symptom that you may have. Fear is the root, and it's because our brain goes into that fight, flight, or freeze mode as a result of sin.
That's very mind-blowing.
I figured you might like that one because that one tends to respond. People tend to be able to access that one. I personally, from a personal standpoint, I'm not going to really ever talk about sin with anybody who's having depression or anxiety or whatever. But if I need to talk to a parent that way to get them to take their kid to therapy, I'll do it all day long. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think you may, if you want to just stick with that one, we will. But
no, give me your other one.
I mean, my other one is that I do believe that God created our brains and our bodies. And so God created science, God created everything. And so if there are tools and things available to help us, it is a gift from God. Mm-hmm. And so I would just not talk about sin because it's not necessary for me to acknowledge that in a therapy session or with somebody, or, if I'm in an environment where it's more receptive.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. I think you definitely have the different groups of people will receive it in different ways. Some people don't recognize sin as some people it's recognized differently for different people. So, and it feels like such a harsh word too. Mm-hmm.
Well, in trauma-informed care, particularly for children and adolescents, a lot of parenting within the Christian community is about what a child is doing wrong or what they shouldn't do. And we found through the neuroscience, I say we, really, Texas Christian University has found through their studies of trauma that children, in order to heal their brains at that age, really respond to a positive approach, a proactive approach. So we're not pointing out or we're not shaming a child for their behaviors that are a result of their trauma. What we're doing is we're actually just teaching what the child should be doing and emphasizing that when they get it right. And so to me, that reflects more of how Jesus taught his disciples. It reflects more of the way that he lived his life. And so for me, I just want to focus on, again, if I'm living my life like Jesus, then sin is not in the picture. So it's children also need that approach of if they're learning what is kind, what is, what's going to help them self-regulate, like what's going to help them have better relationships, then sin is not present. So I don't have to point out that this behavior is against God, or this behavior is going to separate you from God, or anything that has that shame base, because ultimately if I'm just teaching them to live like Jesus, then they're learning how to treat people well and how to treat themselves well and respect themselves and love others the way that God loves them.
Yeah.
So that's really more my approach.
Yeah, and that's amazing, and that's biblical.
It is biblical. So again, and maybe you want to, again, you can decide how you want to utilize this information, but sometimes I do think, having had spiritual trauma, I have a lot of compassion for people who are in the church, or at least raised in the church, and are trying to figure out how to take care of their children when they have trauma, because again, they're working through their own stuff. And so I want to make therapy, trauma care, support accessible kind of wherever somebody is. And I kind of believe that, like, I kind of use this analogy when I'm teaching parents about how to help their children with trauma, is like, you can have all the right answers, but if your child's like hands are closed, they can't receive it. So it doesn't matter like what you're putting out there for them. If their hands are closed, they can't receive it. So I kind of imagine that when I'm working with families who are still involved in maybe some more fundamental Christian settings that might be not comfortable with therapy or not comfortable with addressing trauma, is like, I can't just pile on everything if they don't feel safe, or they don't feel like they can trust. And so my job is to create an environment where they feel receptive. And so I might ease into certain things in order to help that process along.
Yeah. You're very good at that, by the way.
Thank you.
So do you personally see a therapist?
Yes.
Okay.
So, I'm mainly focusing on EMDR. So I have a therapist who does that with me. She's the one that I worked with when we were both training, and she was amazing. And so, I definitely believe therapists should have therapists. I think particularly when you work in a space of trauma, there can be a lot of secondary trauma that happens. And so it's very good to have your own person to go to, even if it's just as needed. So again, I'm a therapist that believes therapy is for everybody, but I also think it's important for me specifically.
Yeah, and how has God shown up for you in your own therapy journey?
Yeah,
aside from the EMDR that you just gave us an example.
Yeah, I would say, like, I think that I've met with different therapists over time trying to kind of find that fit. And I would say that, like, I feel like I've learned a lot about also trying to be accessible for other people when it's the right fit, for me to work with them, by using my own experiences in therapy. And I feel like God has used those times where I've maybe been in a therapy room myself and felt uncomfortable to be like, okay, what are you feeling right now, and how can you create an environment where they feel loved and accepted by God, no matter what they're going through or what they're sharing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think part of what, obviously I respect and love you and look up to you for a lot of different reasons, from my personal experience with seeing you as my therapist. But I think that there's a lot of tributes that you have that make you an admirable person. One of those things being a huge topic of what we've talked about today, which is taking the abuse and the trauma that you've gone through and turning something good into it, or reflecting on, like, it just seems like you're constantly thinking about other people and how things affect other people. So when you're treated poorly or you're made to feel uncomfortable, you take that and you turn it into, well, I don't want to make other people feel that way, so how can I not make someone feel that way? And I think it's a very selfless and admirable trait to have. So I do have one last question for you, is what are traits that you identify to be admirable traits for women in your life, or Christian women all over?
I really love when I see a woman, particularly a woman in the church, who is very much like what we call a girl's girl. Like, I love seeing another woman, whether they're young or older, being comfortable acknowledging other people's strengths, other people's gifts, and championing that. And like, I think for me, I've had people do that for me along the way. I've had people who haven't, but ultimately it's the people who have done that for me that have helped me, again, realize this, the way that God would have me live my life. And so I love that. To me, that's a huge deal. It's like being in a space where women are supporting other women in honoring God. And like, I guess like I was told this once, and I just always think about it. It's like the stage is big enough for everyone. And so it's like there is no limit on who God can use and will use. But I think it's important that we're real specific. So if we see someone who has a gift or a talent that is being underutilized or not seen, like I think we should point it out. We should speak that over them. We should cheer them on and really celebrate with other women when God is using them or blessing them. I think that to me is crucial to just like being the body of Christ.